Hi, all. This is Professor Tommy Maple here in my office at Santa Fe College. I gave a talk earlier this week on the World Cup in Qatar, and it had some issues with the tech, so I wanted to do it again from here in my office. The talk is sponsored by the International Education Center at Santa Fe College. We sponsor a whole bunch of stuff on campus as well as all the study abroads. So I love international education, and I hope everyone loves it as much as I do. And this topic intersects with that very, very much. So what I'd like to talk to you about today is the World Cup, the upcoming World Cup, which by the time you see this might actually be going on. And I want to share my PowerPoint. So to start off, I think that it's important to really kind of talk about where we are in this timeline of global sport in autocracies, because this is sort of about a term called sports washing. So I want to start off with that. I want to look at the timeline. So we're starting really from August 2008. That's when I think that is a good time to go back. We're talking really about the modern era of global sporting events. And if you look at this list here, these are all non-democratic autocracies, and they have virtually dominated hosting global sporting events. August 2008, Beijing hosts the Summer Olympic Games, and I think everyone probably remembers the opening ceremony from that games and how incredible that was, the fire walking in the sky. A few years later, February 2014, Russia hosts the Sochi Winter Olympic Games. They would, just a couple years later, invade Ukraine, which we are now seeing the fruits of in 2022 when they fully invaded, but they were there a few years after this Olympic Games. In fact, they were there when they hosted the World Cup in July 2018. That was a very fraught time. The Russia World Cup was the first one of two in a row now that are going to be in non-democratic countries, the second one being the one starting in a couple of days. Now, February 22 of this year, in fact, Beijing hosted the Winter Olympic Games. So between 2008 and 2022, that means that China's hosted both in Beijing. And now we have at the bottom of the screen there, Live Golf. Saudi Arabia has gotten in the act, bringing the Arab states into hosting global sport when they essentially destroyed golf. They've gone in this year and poached a lot of the best players and really made the PGA real mad. But what they're trying to do in these cases here, this is a really clear case of sports washing. Sports washing is a portmanteau. It's a word we created by putting two other words together. And it comes almost like I believe it's a word from 2022. It's a brand new word, but it was in the 2022 dictionary of words added. So it just got in, but it means to use sports to wash your image. And so it's hosting these sporting events in order to show a face to the world that is positive. Usually the goals of sports washing, and really what we've seen with those examples on the prior page, what you do is you increase your global soft power. Now, soft power is different from hard power. Hard power is military. Soft power, though, is cultural. So it increases your cultural power across the world. What it also does is it helps your reputation. This is where the idea of washing comes from, because it launders or cleans your reputation. It turns you from a country that people look at with negative eyes to one they look at in a more positive way. And then also, beyond that, once those two things start happening, then you encourage Western investment, either direct Western investment in your country or Western investment in companies who are based in your country. So there's a lot of ways that sports washing on the previous page has been seen to do. But I want you to think about this new event in Qatar in a different way. I want you to think about it as sports washing, but really what I want to call hard sports power. Now, I took this term from the Guardian columnist Barty Ronay, and this is an article he wrote. A lot of the stuff is going to be from an article he wrote about a month ago. But really, you'll see a lot of headlines about this World Cup, and they'll all be sports washing. So you'll see that a lot. But I want you to kind of, when you see that, think, well, maybe this is something a little different. So There's also some sporting considerations. I don't know if you saw my kit that I was wearing at the beginning of the video, but I'm an Arsenal fan. And this picture is of 3 Arsenal players. Now, a big deal in this World Cup is that it has completely bisected every European league. They're in the middle of the season. This is the first World Cup in history, because when there's wars, they didn't have them a couple times. This is the first World Cup in history that is going to be in the winter. They're always in the summer, every single time, because the seasons are all over. So players can almost use it as a time to recharge and go off with their country, and it doesn't interfere with the season. This World Cup will interfere with the season. In fact, my favorite team, Arsenal, it might cause them to lose the title because they're #1 right now. And who knows what's going to happen in this World Cup. There's going to be every single team playing very important games, at least 4 of them. Very probably people will get injured, and there will certainly be fatigue. So there's some real sporting considerations to think about that we won't really go over except for this. I think they're very important. I won't really go over them too much. There's also player livelihoods. These players have worked their entire lives for this chance. They would play a World Cup on the moon if given the shot, right? So you can't really hold the players accountable for the fact that the World Cup is in Qatar. I don't want us to do that. I don't want to think about that. Now, in this picture you see, the middle fella there, his name is Martin Odegaard. He won't get injured. He's actually one of my favorite players, probably my favorite player, because Norway did not make it to the World Cup. But the other 2 players, they actually might get hurt. William Saliba on the right is a great defender for France, and then Bukayo Saka on the left is one of England's best players. Some of the things that might also occur in this World Cup, and I want you to think about that are issues, I won't really focus too much on them, are, I'm going to use Bukayo as an example. He was the victim of racial abuse after missing a penalty at the end of Euro 2021 that cost England a shot at the championship. There was a lot of online hurled at Bukayo Saka. In fact, it seemed as if the whole country was against him. And now that we're seeing a World Cup in a place like Qatar, where there is very little diversity, that is a specter. There could be some racist incidents looking forward over the next few weeks. Watch out for that. Also, one thing that won't really touch upon, but is worth talking about, is the region. This is, the title says Region and Rage, but really where Qatar is, it's this tiny little country right here. It has a population of about 2.7 million, but of those people, of those 2.7 million, only about 300,000 are actual citizens. And so it's a very, very small country. Now, there is in the Middle East a big Shia and Sunni divide. This is the division in the Arab world. If you're not really familiar with it, think of it sort of like Catholics and Protestants. Not exactly, but sort of, right? Now, this works out that Qatar and Iran are actually friends, while Saudi Arabia, that Qatar is nominally attached to, hates Iran. That is the big rivalry, is Saudi and Iran. That is the Shia-Sunni divide. UAE also hates Iran. They're a little emirate, one of Qatar's neighbors. Qatar and the Saudis are friends for now. Saudi and the USA, not so much. We're going through a rough patch with the Saudis after the Jamal Khashoggi murder. And Saudis now are kind of getting closer to China and Russia. So that's how the geopolitics are working out for this right now. Now, though, this is how the geopolitics really are working. This is how they worked. Britain carved up and France carved up the Middle East and created all the countries of the Middle East. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, you can see, and this will come up later, the red zone is down there where the red zone and the pink zone under British influence are both where we're really focusing on, and they'll come up later. The fact that the British influence, in fact, direct or indirect control, is certainly going to come up later in this presentation, the British relationship with this area. Now, the other thing to think about too, that this was built by petrol and politics, right? The map of the Middle East really is a projection of state and corporate power. I want you to think about that also as we move through this. So the spotlight on Qatar, you may have heard it so far. A lot of it is on women's rights, the rights of LGBTQ people, and then alcohol use. as well as migrant workers' rights. So we're going to touch on all those. Of course, there's been progress though, to give them some credit, right? Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Now they have done a lot for Qatar. For anyone in the Middle East, they've done a lot to liberalize their laws on all of these issues, but certainly not anywhere close to the Western European countries that are going to be sending thousands of their fans to this area, who are actually already there. They've already arrived. So this is where we're going to talk about these. We're going to touch on all of these. What I'm not really going to talk much about is the bribery angle. If you're a fan of football or soccer, as it's called here, you know that all the federations are irredeemably corrupt. FIFA is one of the most corrupt organizations on the planet. And Qatar only got this World Cup because they openly bribed people. The US Department of Justice prosecuted this case in 2021. This is all sealed and dealed. They cheated and they bought this cup. But we'll move beyond that. It's here now. This was in 2010. They bought it. Yes, they cheated. They bribed. It wasn't really a scandal because FIFA is the dirtiest organization in the history of mankind. So it just happened. And then we're all like, okay, these are the things that are actually happening on the ground. So this is also what's happening on the ground. There are protests all across the European leagues. Now, this was actually at the World Cup. This was at the Euro final, but there's been protests all over Germany over the last few weeks. I'll have some pictures of them. The reason fans want to boycott Qatar are that it's hugely expensive. The most expensive World Cup there ever will be in world history. Yes, ever. And also there's paid fans here. And people who are boycotting it also feel there's not been enough progress on those rights. And some of them are mad about the bribes and cheating. But like I said, they're really kidding themselves. FIFA is the most corrupt organization in the history of mankind. So this is a slide showing the past World Cup spending. This is what the host nations spent to host the World Cup, to build the stadiums and host the World Cup. United States, 94, half a billion, they're 500 million. By France in 1998, 2.3 billion. Japan 2002 jumps up to 7. I imagine that was due to the costs associated. Just Japan probably had a very high standard as well. They wanted to make their structures too. Germany spent a little less in 2006, only 4.3 billion, because they do have a great infrastructure of stadiums and just in general. South Africa, only 3.6. So that was a little more of an austere cup, whereas Brazil in 2014, 4 years later, spent 15 billion. Now Russia, only 11.6, and you're dealing with inflation and all these numbers now. But then Qatar, 220 billion. This is the most expensive World Cup that will ever be. There will never be a World Cup more expensive than this one. And that's to come. I'll tell you why. So the reason it's hugely expensive is because they're building a lot more than just stadiums. Those 220 billion in costs are not just stadiums. They're actually mostly not stadiums. As you can see, this is an exponentially higher number than the rest. And they're only expecting about 20 billion of a positive impact. And I would very much doubt that number. That's a hugely optimistic number. Now, the fans, it's going to be hugely expensive for them as well. There are specific fan zones and times where you can drink beer, and the beer will cost about $14 for one beer. Those are US dollars. Now, the news came out just this morning that they are not going to sell beer in the stadiums, except for Bud Zero, which, as you can imagine, has zero alcohol. So that's new. That's happening right now. And then the hotels and airfare are incredibly expensive, between $7,000 and $20,000 per person. And for that $7,000, what do you get? Something looks a lot like Fire Festival. Also, watch this in the news the next few weeks about the pictures coming out of accommodations. $7,000 or $8,000 in the desert doesn't buy you a whole lot. So look on social media for these. I bet they're going to be all over the place the next few weeks. But really, there's also this. There's paid fans. They call them fan leaders, but they're flying in 40 fan groups or 40 fans and their families from each country These fans are required to post positive social media. They must stay for at least 14 days, even if their team is knocked out in the first round. They have to stay 14-day minimum, and they're required to attend selected and scheduled events. As you can imagine, this has not gone down well with a lot of European soccer fans, because soccer is football is very much an important part of their culture, and to sully it with money like this and to purchase fans, it goes against everything that European football is about. The video of Qatar fans. They do not think they're real fans. So, and in Germany either, they say boycott Qatar. Boycott it. This was signs up last weekend. Boycott Qatar. This is, Germany's one of the favorites, I would say. So it's incredible. This has never happened before, that World Cup had such negative fan kind of protests. But that's also because of this, the LGBTQ laws in the country. Now, Law 17 of the 2002 Protection of Community says that any case involving state security, honor, decency, and public morals will get you detained for 2 weeks and up to 6 months with no trial. They just disappear you. They just take you away. And Law 17 makes it legal. You don't have to have broken any law. But there are laws. Article 285 of the Penal Code says that any extramarital sex is punishable by up to 7 years in prison. And this includes, by definition, all same-sex relationships, because they do not recognize them. So anyone shown, or anyone who's seen kissing someone of the same sex could be put in jail for a minimum of 2 weeks and up to 6 months with no trial and no explanation. As you can imagine, Europeans do not agree with any of this and are very scared. I would say that not only looking out for the Fire Festival headlines, look out for this. This actually will come up before. I think that this is more of an outrage. And I think that look on social media for violations of these agreements. Now, Qatar has said that they will not enforce these laws on visitors, but that really just highlights the fact that they're unfairly enforcing them on their own population. Now, there's also male guardianship in Qatar. Qatar requires a woman to have a male guardian's permission to marry, regardless of if she's been married before, how old she is. She can be deemed disobedient. She has not gained permission for doing almost anything. There's no such thing as marital rape in these countries. So men can marry up to 4 women at a time without needing permission from a guardian or even their current wives. And then even outside their home, a woman can never act as her child's primary guardian, ever. Even after a divorce, even after she had legal custody, she's not the primary guardian. And then also those male guardians, who every woman must have, has to give the woman permission to travel abroad until certain ages, study abroad, receive some forms of reproductive health care. So women's rights, LGBTQ rights, less than stellar. Now, like I said, Qatar has been moving on these ever so slowly. They've been softening some of their positions. But what they've also done is build $220 billion worth of infrastructure. The stadium you see in the picture to the left, that was one of the many stadiums being built, and the picture to the right are some of the workers. They are usually from Bangladesh or Sri Lanka. There's a whole lot from Kenya. And so there's these folks do not have citizenship rights under the previous kafala system. They did not have their passports. They were slaves. They were literally legal slaves. This, as I told you, the World Cup was granted to them in 2010. So they, in 2021, last year, they removed the kafala system. So that means for 11 years, they were working with millions, hundreds of thousands of slave laborers, and they were working them to death. Many, many, many migrant workers died. And that is also one of the reasons why people do not want to go to this World Cup. This is what they were building. They were building in the 140-degree heat at times. If you don't have rights as a citizen, which no one does who isn't born in Qatar, and then also your parents were born there. There's no such thing as birthright citizenship in Qatar. Even if you're born there, that doesn't mean you're necessarily a citizen. These migrants, as you can imagine, they don't even have passports. They had no rights. Of course, they were going to be worked to death. In fact, in Bayern last weekend, they said there was 15,000 dead for 5,760 minutes of football. Now that catches the eye, doesn't it? So is it worth it? Is it worth 15,000 estimated dead workers for football? Now there will be more minutes than that. I'll give you that. That's not including overtime, but that's something to think about. That's why people are protesting. Now again, 313,000 citizens, 2.3 million migrants in this country. As I said, here Santa Fe College is in Gainesville, Florida. Alachua County has about 300,000 inhabitants. So there's about as many real actual citizens of Qatar as there are citizens of Alachua County. Now, what I really want to talk about is how Qatar has turned this World Cup into hard sports power. In 2010, they won the World Cup, and they actually moved their office to Geneva, Switzerland. So they built it directly across from FIFA, across the lake, Geneva, which was smart. And they've used this World Cup to increase their hard power, their hard foreign policy and military power. I'll show you how. So they won the World Cup, and then they spent $220 billion. Like I was telling you, it wasn't just on stadiums. It was also on Project Dariat. 200 RAF soldiers, Royal Air Force soldiers from Britain, have been working with the Qatar Air Force, as it is now, spent the last 3 years. Last week saw the delivery of the last 4 of 12 Typhoon jets. So Doha, Qatar now has a military force. Never did. Now they actually have the first ever joint Typhoon squadron. And this is the Royal Air Force first joint squadron with another country since World War II. This 12 squadron is what it's called. It's been training and knowledge transfer. And it's the first Typhoon squadron in Qatar, and immediately vaults Qatar to the top of the military spectrum in the Middle East. So 12 squadron, as I said, last 4 of 12 Typhoons. They have now one of the most impressive militaries in the Middle East. This joint Qatari-British partnership has been, like I said, going on for the last 3 years, and it just got delivered this week. What else do they have? They have 3,250 Turkish security officers there. They now have South Korean military specialists teaching close combat skills. Now they're part of NATO, because NATO's looking after all the chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear threats. Why is NATO there? Because all the European fans are there, and they have to protect them. So Qatar got the World Cup, they got all the European fans, and then they got hard sports power. 36 US F-115QA fighter jets and 24 Apaches, helicopter gunships. They got 28 helicopters from Italy, 36 fighting planes and refueling planes from France. They now are in the drone hunter attack system. They're in the Sky Dome. They're in the airborne threat surveyor. They have Kronos radar. By winning the World Cup, Qatar was able to buy their way to the top of the military spectrum in the Middle East. I'll say it again. They now have hard power based on sports. This isn't just sports washing. This is hard sports power. They are hardening their military border. They are entering the coalition. They built an airbase in 2003 for us in Doha, but didn't have any planes until this week. Now they do. So in summary, sports washing and global sporting events has been going on for a while. I would say that more traditional ways like China, Russia, Saudi Arabia, it's kind of easier to understand. And then Qatar has made some progress on a lot of these rights. So there's the silver lining to that cloud as well. Now, there's certainly criticism. And what you want to look out for this next week are the real social media headlines that are going to be coming out about this event. But really, I want you to understand that this is also about Qatar and their hard sports power and how that is actually going to change the future of the region. I think that not enough is being said about this, and I'll actually include this PowerPoint with all the links at the end if you want to study further for yourself. But have fun watching the World Cup. Thank you for watching my video, and go USMNT.